I am joined, and I'll begin from my far left, Professor Ambassador David Kikaya. He's the founding director of the Research Institute for Peace and International Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Also, great to have Professor Ambassador Maria Nzomo, Professor of International Relations and Governance at the Department of Diplomacy and International Studies at the University of Nairobi. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining us. We also have Dr. Edgar Githua, International Affairs Security and Diplomacy expert, not a new face in our studios. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll also be joined shortly by Nasongo Muliro, who's a foreign policy and security specialist as well. So a lot we're looking forward to today, and I want us to begin by understanding the crucial role of AUC within the African Union. Look, I've seen largely on social media people speaking about the person who manages to clinch the seat of the AUC would be the president of Africa. So just to get that distinction, the AUC and the AU, the functions of the AUC vis-a-vis the larger African Union. Let me begin with you, Dr. Githua.
Thank you, Zainab, for having me, and good afternoon to everyone. So largely the AUC, the secretariat, is a secretariat of the African Commission, of the African Union, and it drives the day-to-day agenda of the African Union. Why the role of the AUC chairperson becomes crucial is because that person spearheads the agenda for the continent, of course, and also coordinates with other heads of state, and pretty much even a football match, think of him as the midfielder who keeps on going around these heads of state, reaching out, building consensus, and basically making sure that the agendas and the goals of the African Union are met. So other than the secretary that runs the day-to-day issues, this person now leads the diplomatic charge for the African Union, organizes the agenda, builds consensus around it. So pretty much it's a very influential, very visible role. You want someone who is going to be able to have a big grasp, a grand strategy for the African continent in general to help drive forward the agenda. I mean, in summary, that's how I'll describe it.
Right.
Yeah.
Professor Nzomo, what do you think has brought in this interest right now compared to other elections on the AUC chairperson, deputy chairperson position? There has been a lot of conversation around it. Is it just because that it is Kenya that has fronted former Prime Minister Raila Odinga that perhaps it has generated such interest?
Thank you. Partly that we have a candidate whom, was actually, he went through the whole process. Initially, there were not just 3, there were more. And he was shortlisted. And as you recall, 8 years ago, we had another candidate, the Ambassador Amina Mohammed,
right,
who almost got the seat, but then lost it. So we still have a debt. And, we've been waiting for this as a country. And, of course, as part of being a region, which is called Africa, we feel we have a role we could play there. And, for countries all over the world, institutions such as the African Union are important politically in many ways because they give that country visibility on the global stage, a visibility you cannot get anywhere else. Mm-hmm. And so having the spokesperson of the African Union as the chair, it means you have that edge. You'll be representing regional interests, yes. But every time people see him, they will ask, where is he from? He's from Kenya. So even those who perhaps might forget from time to time that Kenya is that place, he keeps reminding them. And that's important for the Kenyan people. Then you know how our pride, he's the son of Kenya. So even if you don't, in your personal life, love Raila, now he's the son of Kenya. Mm-hmm. So we all have to rally around him and give him the support that he requires. But the job he's taking up is not an easy job. Given the problems there are, the challenges, especially now that the AU is experiencing, some of them have to do with our own internal regional issues, but also others are global, which are also affecting this continent. So I think that is the part at which our people need to understand, even the complexity of the elections they're just about to have. It is not automatic. You know, our candidate is a very good candidate. He has worked very hard, he has lobbied hard, the country has supported him, our president has supported him, but we cannot assume he's going to clinch the seat. And so all the Kenyans now are hanging on to see whether that miracle is going to happen.
Right.
Because it's not automatic.
Yes, Professor Kikai, in fact, let's just look at the three candidates, right? Their backgrounds and experiences. So we have Raila Odinga. He's 80 years old, former Prime Minister of Kenya. He's also held the position of AU's High Representative for Infrastructure. You have Mahmoud Ali Yusuf. He's 59 years old. He's been his country's chief diplomat for nearly the same length of time. At 56, Richard Ranjemandrato is a former foreign minister of Madagascar. He's the youngest candidate in the race. What particularly strikes you about their visions if elected?
Yeah, first and foremost, all those three candidates, like my sister here has said, went through the grills. So they were found to be, at that particular point in time and up to now, equal to occupy the seat. Secondly, something that strikes me amongst them is their international exposure. When you talk about Raila, he's not a stranger onto the international stage. Occupying a position like Prime Minister, and also a position of Vice President in the country at a time when the Vice President tended to be the one that was sent out on missions. So he has interacted in the corridors of internationalism, if you like. Of course, his position as Commissioner for Infrastructure, again, gave him that expose. The same thing can be said of the other two candidates. They had long experience, either in the ministries, respective Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or even related departments. So for me, they are all bringing on the table very credible credentials, and any one of them is as good as the other at this particular point in time.
What do you think are some of the factors that are going to come at play here when we're looking at how perhaps the voting patterns will go?
Yes. In my simple analysis, I have around 5 factors which are going to play a role in differing levels. The first one to me is, to what extent has each candidate campaigned continental-wise? How has been his reach on the continent? And equally important to that one is, did the candidates do an exit vote to find out what impact they had when they were doing their continental trip? To me, that is going to be visibility and exposure is going to be a factor. The second factor, as far as I'm concerned, is the impact of not only the candidate, but the country in its regional bloc. And maybe I'll come back to that one slightly later. How is the bloc, how does it perceive? The issue of perception in international relations, unfortunately, comes to play here. How is not only the individual, but also the country perceived in that regional bloc? For example, Southern Africa, Western Africa, the Horn. How is that particular part?
So the country itself as well will come.
Yes, will come
as a core area of interest as well.
The third aspect that I have myself seen is what we don't like to talk about. What is the influence of religion in this matter? Religiosity. And in this case, we should not shy away from saying it's going to be a question of the impact of Islam versus Christianity. To what extent are people going to coerce, countries going to coerce around religion to support one of their perceived, and I'm using the word perceived very advisedly, perceived Muslim and perceived Christian, because we can go into the academic semantics about that later. And then, to me, the fourth aspect would be the traditional and historical Francophone, Anglophone divide on the continent. Unfortunately, this has played into our psyche And I'm not going to belabor the point. I remember as a young diplomat, when we went for those meetings there, the Francophone-speaking guys tended to have a chip off their shoulders until when you came to the nitty-gritties and to tell them, listen, you've not done your homework properly, can you go back and come and report back to me? Then they calm down. Right. So the Francophone, Anglophone arrogance may also play a role. Finally, what I call the fifth factor, to me, is the internationalization of this office. You know, like it or not, Africa is still very much, I don't want to use the word a captive of internationalism, but the interests of internationalism are very, very strong. And the extent to which the soothsayers from the international spectrum have played behind the back to be sure that their candidate, preferred candidate, has been, is the chosen one, to me is going to play a factor. And I'm hoping that we can come back to that, then I can amplify what I actually mean.
Yeah, very interesting to hear that, you know, the issue of external pressure from the global powers. But Dr. Gidewa, I would also like to get your insights on the same in terms of the factors. Do you agree with exactly what Professor Kikaya has mentioned in terms of the factors that perhaps will come to play on the voting patterns? Yeah,
I agree. I agree with what Professor Kikaya said. By the way, he's my teacher.
Oh, don't tell them, please.
Don't tell them. Very respected teacher. I want to add on his 5, I agree with all the 5 factors he's brought, and then I'll add a 6th one, regional rivalries and regional perspectives. And I'll give an example of the recent handling of the DRC crisis and the many crises that have been on the African continent. And then let me throw another spanner in the works. International conflicts and the perceptions of individual countries' interest in them. For example, in the DRC crisis, if there's a SADC East African rivalry, depending on the handling of the situation, if there is a misperception around the handling of that conflict, unfortunately, it will play out in the voting patterns. President Ramaphosa's spat with President Kagame, that Southeast tension could work, is a double-edged sword, actually. All right, I am hoping that President Ramaphosa's strong ties with Raila Odinga and their friendship could, you know, surmount some of these things. But those are some of the things that, some of the nitty-gritty, you could call them petty, but very important aspects that I'll bring in. So the handling and the perception of, for example, President Tshisekedi and the Francophone countries, riding on Professor Kikaya's point, President Tshisekedi and his band of friends, peers at heads of state level, their perception that will the Kenyan candidate favor Rwanda or favor South or favor DRC or favor the South African issue. Those are some of the back-end issues that need to be ironed out. Otherwise, they come to fore in some of these issues. Riding back on his point on religion and where is Kenya's position on the Israel-Palestinian issue? Where have we pronounced ourselves? Will that bring the Arab vote to us or chase them away? It's some of those. So in my view, when Kenya realized it was going to present a candidate, regardless of whoever our candidate was, when it realized it was going to go for this seat, your international relations, in my view, needs to be now reorganized backwards from that perspective. Every step Kenya has made in the international arena, every step, every pronouncement we've made outside our borders, and especially now within the African continent, is brought to bear in such an important election. Yeah, because international relations, like Professor has said, the 2 professors have said, there's a lot of perception. Remember, international relations is also based on interests. Okay. A country will vote based on where it feels. If Kenya's candidate clinches this seat, will our interest be taken care of? Even though he's the African candidate and he represents Africa, but will our individual interests be amplified? Will they be taken care of? Or will he be part of the barriers and the blockades in preventing us from getting where we need to be as a nation state? Yeah. Those are some of the intricate, deep, behind opaque issues. But have a potential to influence the voting patterns of the candidates.
All right.
Yeah.
And Prof, I will come to you in just a moment to also get your insights on the factors you believe will come at play. But like I said earlier on, we have watch parties here in Kenya, in the capital, and as far as Kisumu as well, we have our very own Judith Cherono in Kisumu County there. Judith, very good afternoon to you. Just give us a glimpse of what is happening in Kisumu, the watch party there, and some of the expectations of the residents of Kisumu.
A very good afternoon to you, Zainab in Nairobi. We are indeed coming to you from Kondele, the famous Kondele, and we are surrounded by so many people who are already coming to see or to witness what is happening from Ethiopia. And now, without wasting time, let us just go direct to hear their views. Sir, welcome to NTV at 1. I'll kindly introduce yourself and tell us your reaction.
Thank you so much. I'm Wycliffe Juma, coming to you from Kondele in Kisumu. We are happy and anticipating for our victory. Raila Odinga is a pragmatic. Raila Odinga is futuristic in character. Raila Odinga is the leader in whom we know. And what we are waiting for as Kondele people is to celebrate Raila Odinga as the next AU chairperson. And that is how positive we are. Yes. Therefore, what we say is that everybody, we thank even William Samoei Ruto because he has gone ahead to lobby and to campaign for our Baba Raila Odinga, Baba Osekao Gini. We say Baba Gini Osekao.
You can also introduce yourself and tell us what you are.
I'm Ochieng Bongo, a citizen of Kenya. I want to state here categorically that vultures have no business in a garden of evil. Reason being, Baba has fought for Kenya for many years. But to be honest, Kenyans have never appreciated what Agwambo has done. We have submitted our finest to African continent. We hope that Agwambo is going to take this, and we are very jovial and happy for Agwambo.
Thank you very much.
I'm called Kevin Otieno, a strong supporter of Baba. I'm confident that Baba today, being the election day, Baba is going to win. And I'm also grateful for the president having taken a lead in the campaign to the seat that Baba is going to take today. We are confident that he's going to take that win at home here. We are waiting for celebration, and everybody, as you can see, they are jovial and they are waiting for that time. Baba has amassed a lot of energy in politics, and he's not a new baby in town. He's the father of democracy, and Baba is going to take the lead today.
Thank you very much. You, sir, before I hand over the camera, please talk to us, tell us your name and your expectations.
My name is Anthony Agola, Lion of Kondele. I'm supporting Raila Odinga, the Lion of Africa. Why? Raila is a Democrat, first of all. As you can see where we are standing, this is Kondele flyer. This was built because of Raila Odinga and Moi Kibaki. Then Vision 2030. For now, we are really waiting for the announcement of the Lion of Africa. Only Agwambo. We wish you well.
Final one from you, sir.
Yes, I'm very glad. Today, we want to celebrate Agwambo, and we are waiting for the result. Anytime. When Agwambo win this, we know Agwambo is going to change our Africa. You can see what is happening in the AU. And Agwambo will change. And I know even our sons and daughters will enjoy the fruits of Agwambo. Chinga Wudija Lego. I'm a Mondio Nunga from Dewa. Agwambo has taken. Agwambo power! Power! Amina! My names are George Wandaya. I'm saying categorically, Baba, you win or you lose. There is still fireworks in Kondele. You go, fireworks. You lose, fireworks. Kondele is still strong. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Ismail, those are just views of these people. We'll also bring you more from this place later on during the bulletin at 1 p.m. For now, I return it to you in studio. And like they've said, Baba Gini Wasekao. Back to you, Ismail.
All right, Judith Cherano there speaking to residents of Kondele and Kisumu. You can tell the mood is palpable. And they're saying that, you know, Agwambo is the lion of Africa. So certainly the expectations are high for Raila Odinga to win this race. But Professor Nzomo, back to you in terms of the insights on the factors that would be playing out today in the voting patterns. And in light, by the way, of the expectations we see of Kenyans.
Yes, indeed. And the risk of repeating some of what my colleagues have already said, there are a number of factors that will come into play, and not all of them you have the same weight for different voters. Remember, these are member states voting individually. Each one of them has one vote, and that vote becomes very important in terms of where do I put this vote and for which candidate. And Africa, of course, is going through very difficult challenges right now, and anyone who cares about the continent would want to think about this candidate. Is he really a serious reformer? Someone who can transform governance within the African Union, someone who can represent the multiple interests of member states, and someone who also would understand that there has to be a balance between national interests and regional interests. And that's a difficult one. Because right now, as they are going to vote, frankly speaking, the majority of them are putting their national interests first. And at the same time, they are talking about regional integration. We want a Pan-Africanist. This Pan-Africanist has to be a very special person who is able to balance these national interests, regional interests, and to be able to manage the international environment, which can be quite unpredictable. And as you know, right now, all of these external actors, they are descending on Africa for various reasons. The so-called second scramble for Africa is on, and it's been on for some time. And therefore, they have an interest in the outcome. Is this someone who can be able to be a good referee? And the other one related to that, sometimes when you look at the African Union, especially now, apart from of course, the highest level, which is that one of the Assembly of Heads of States and Government, we then just think about the African Union Commission. The African Union as a whole, its governance structure has 9 organs, of which this commission is just one of them. However, the person who sits in that office will be expected to be able to coordinate all the others, including doing their main mandate, which is really being the chief administrative officer of the of the African Union.
Right.
Yeah? The day-to-day running of the affairs of the Union. But in addition, has also to manage all the other 8 organs in terms, because they all must coalesce somewhere. And that's a big responsibility. And then he also has to be careful not to do anything that would make the heads of states and government within their own organ, which is the Assembly of the Union, uncomfortable, balancing their own interests. And one thing he cannot do is to actually make himself a decision maker, because he doesn't have that role. That belongs to the member states. He has actually to be very careful that he's implementing the mandate already approved and legitimized by the heads of states and government. And so, some people will be looking to see, is this a person who can be, quote unquote, obedient in terms of understanding their role and performing it well. Yeah? And I think, each one of the candidates has something to offer. Those who are coming in with the former ministers of foreign affairs, they have the diplomacy on their side, meaning they'll be very good in terms of, negotiating and all those, nice words you have to say when you are negotiating with others, to understand the global community, which will be important as well, and how to manage it in its dealing with Africa. And of course, to be able to know in terms of hierarchy, which are the interests of Africa on the global stage, so that as they negotiate, they can adopt a very good strategy of statecraft, what we call statecraft, bringing all those instruments of power and other resources to be able to bargain and do the best for this continent. So we are looking for a transformer, actually, if we have to be honest, a transformer, transformational leadership, which is very difficult to find. Who is going to deal with all the disagreements in this region, for example, which were being mentioned at the opening here, the DRC situation, the Sudan, and all the other, crises in this region. Member states are involved in them. How do you manage them? And not be seen to be either biased or weak? They will expect you to be robust, to be bold, to be this. How do you balance all of those?
Prof, you speak of the capability of the individual candidates, but I remember Professor Kikaya as well saying that even despite that, there's still going to be the standing of the country itself.
The country is also on trial. We can even use that term. And I think, let's take our candidate from Kenya, right? I think he has done his best in terms of marketing himself. He's been doing it for over a year now. He has done everything humanly possible to win the hearts and minds of the continent. But there are still the Kenya image, you haunt him. Those who don't like Kenya, they may not vote for him, not because he's Raila, but because of Kenya. So because they are also looking at their own national interests. So definitely, Raila and Kenya are one and the same thing today. There is no separation.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Professor Kikaya, let's look at the issue of the regional support and alliances. Just a couple of days ago, we saw the SADC rally its members behind Madagascar's candidate, Mr. Richard Ranjemandrato. That's a 16-member state, right? Does this have any bearing in terms of how the votes will sway when you look at it in that sense? And of course, this is going to be a secret ballot, so obviously we'll not know how. We would be presumptuous to perhaps look at how they're going to vote, but that letter asking the members to vote in a certain way, does it have any bearing?
That's exactly what I meant when I was looking at the influencing factors in this particular vote. The fact that regional blocs are taking positions for, diplomatically, don't say and not for, but you can always read between the lines. The honest saving grace is, to what extent are they coherent as an entity inside themselves, to the point where they can sell their sovereignty, if I can put it that way, to a secretariat rather than to an ideal. So as far as I'm concerned, when I saw that 16 countries is not a mean number at all, especially when you have to raise 30 plus members. How do you know what is going on behind the scenes amongst the Maghreb, for example? How do you know what's going on behind the scenes in the other parts of the, can I call it IGAD, if not the Horn of Africa? So you cannot really dismiss the significance of those blocks. And again, this is what I was referring to when I talked about regional blocks, like Dr. Gidwa said very clearly when giving an example, like in the case of the DRC. DRC has, unfortunately, the timing of it is very, very unfortunate. And you have seen that there has been a complete division on the various players.
Unfortunate for Nairobi?
without saying it too loudly.
All right.
A wedge has been already drawn. My honest desire would be states would want to hang on to sovereignty as their guiding principle. But I'm pragmatic enough to say that I don't think we can rely on more than, to be generous, 50% of those SADC countries. We saw Tanzania was amongst the areas supposed to declare support for Raila. But do understand historically, Tanzania was a founder member of SADC. In fact, Tanzania was the person who actually gave birth to SADC. But that's a debate for another day, if you want. So let's not dismiss that particular decision, but I would still say Raila could very easily get about close to half of those countries. I'm thinking of countries like Lesotho, I'm thinking of Botswana, for example. South Africa is touch and go. And as Gidewa said, of course, historically, Ramaphosa and Raila have been buddies. But how does that translate into a vote? And then if I can migrate your question to the Horn of Africa, who is there that can compensate for what we might lose in SADC? And then the issue of Central or East Africa has expanded. I think that one I have already talked about it. What's going to happen now in West Africa? What I may call the countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Ivory Coast, all that conurbation of countries. What's going to happen? What's going to be their determining factor there? We know that Raila has had very good friendships with the Olusegun Obasanjo of Nigeria. And we know that he actually threw his all into this campaign. Can we argue that perhaps we could get 3/4 of that area? I'm not privy to how much we've done in the Maghreb area. Can we talk about maybe another 60% up there? I'm not sure.
Despite the religion aspect of it?
Exactly, exactly. So it's a really...
It's a tough balancing
act. It's a tough balancing act, and I would like to hear what the best... who are these people who do estimate as Aquaria?
Opinion poll.
Yes, I would be very interested to see how they work out that mathematics.
Right. I don't know. Yes, Professor Nsomo. What does your math look like?
In regard to the Kenyan candidate?
Yes, and the regional voting system and patterns.
You know, before SADC happened, meaning this sudden decision, because it's quite recent, you know, the Secretariat of SADC urging its members to support the Madagascar candidate, one would have said the chances for Raila were very high, because he had a lot of support already garnered through his lobbying and also his connections in that region. And 16 members are many, they are not few. So we were counting on those votes. And now they are no longer guaranteed at all. And yes, there will be some who you see vote for Raila, either because their relations with Kenya or Raila himself. But we cannot guarantee. If we are lucky, Professor Kaya talked about 50%. I would be a bit generous, maybe say 60%, because you see this last minute diplomatic legwork, which was being done by the president in Addis. I was thinking that a lot of that was to try to persuade some of the SADC members to retain their support for Raila. So I would raise it to about 60% in that regard. But then we also have to take care of the other regions. And you know, with the elections, because these are elections, political elections, there are always those people, they'll vote, but they remain undecided until almost the last minute. And they just need something very small to tip them in the other direction. So we may be lucky. Those may have been ones the president and the foreign minister of foreign affairs, because one of the main people, and the prime candidate, that is, you know, may have persuaded some of those, you know, and the extent to which, and it's something maybe we need also to talk about, that we are able to do the horse trading, where we would ask those who are going to vote for a candidate for the chair, we will support them for the deputy chair, because there is also that voting going on as well, and the other positions like commissioners and so on. You know, in a sense, saying, you know, this, you know, give and take, yeah. The extent to which that has been done could give us, you know, maybe 60%. I don't know. It could go either way. At this time, it is a very dicey situation, but we are hoping for the very best for Raila.
And I'll come to you, Prof. But Dr. Githua, you know, in hindsight, in 2017, when we fronted then Ambassador Amina Mohammed, there was a lot of optimism and that, you know, she was going to garner the votes that we needed, but things turned out quite differently than what we expected.
Exactly.
Is it perhaps then, you know, perhaps that's the outcome we might face today?
I think thanks for your question, and I think that is why the government took a different approach this time around, not leaving anything to chance and going all out and really literally mapping the entire continent and saying, I mean, reports tell us that Honorable Raila has gone to over 30 countries, 30, some reports say 35 countries, really trying to tick every box. But like my colleagues have said, my seniors have said, there are candidates who will speak with double speak. They will welcome you and diplomatically tell you we will support you. Like, for example, and let me say this on live air, our president led his delegation and went to Egypt and introduced our candidate to them, only for when we thought we had secured Egypt's vote, for them to turn around the following day and endorse, I think, publicly the Djibouti candidate. So there is, everybody will receive you. This is Africa. We are open. We are very hospitable people by nature. We will receive you. Even your enemy will not deny you a cup of water. But what you do once you walk out of their door is a totally different story.
Right.
So Ambassador Amina had everything going for her. We broke out our champagne bottles a little bit early. And rumors have it, and maybe my senior colleagues can verify, it is some countries in the East African community who stabbed us in the back at the very last minute. When we thought we were together, someone in the East African community felt they would not vote for our candidate. Why? Because in international relations, Kenya getting this position, we are getting too much mileage. We are rising way above everybody else. Why should we be the beacon of light in the region? So there are these petty rivalries, and we can understand them from a national interest perspective, that sometimes we are in the East African community, but we all want to shine. We want to shine. Everybody wants to be number one. So why should I allow you to get this glory? So if it gets to that point, I am wishing our Prime Minister the very best, but what I have done, I am following what Mandago taught us some time back. We put these things in our lungs so that we can be able to breathe and have a life.
Not to put it in the heart.
Exactly. Okay. I've looked at what is happening in the Nyanza region and the expectation, and I can feel the tension. It's so palpable. I am hoping that they have put themselves in a position to expect any result.
Right. Because
I don't know how some people will recover, how some people will sleep tonight. So anything would happen. I'm saying Africa needs the best candidate. These are three very strong candidates. I'm wishing Honorable Raila the best. But I know there are so many dynamics that are attached to this vote.
Right. Professor Kikaya, you wanted to add on to a certain point.
Yes, and let me start by saying that from what Githua said about Kisumu, I'm hoping that they will light candles one way or the other. I was so glad to hear the other guy talking about lighting candles, because, you know, I have to pass Kondele. Yes, I have to pass Kondele to go to my village home, so at Vihiga and Vihiga. And I know what we have suffered in the past about Kondele, so I'll join in the fireworks. I can give me an M-Pesa number, I'll send you some. But having said that, I'm just wondering to what extent we might have played the card of payback in these matters. Because if you look at from the time when office was established, it has tended to be a West Africa, North Africa position. You know, we had Cote d'Ivoire, we had Gabon, we had Chad, and just South Africa crept in insidiously. And I'm just wondering to what extent one can say that it is payback time, not to mention the fact that we even had, according to the African Union regulations, that a female candidate also in a very professional diplomat, Amina Mohammed, and still we could not clinch. So can we argue that perhaps it is payback time for Kenya? But I am conscious, and I'm glad we are doing this interview when the people are supposed to make decisions are not listening. Perhaps they'll hear about it later. East Africa has been very unsettled about Kenya, and I don't know to what extent people have taken that unsettled seriously. When we campaigned and got, it goes back, we campaigned and got UNEP. We are aware of the countries that were not very keen on our hosting that. But was so, when we again campaigned and got the UN habitat on board, we know that some specific countries that connived with some specific foreign countries, which you have to pay me to say it on the air if I can, but I will not. Diplomacy defends me from saying it. Who actually campaigned as having the UN settlement to be upgraded to the UN habitat as a fully UN agents, and I can talk to this with authority because I was on that table. So we should not underestimate our own intra-regional rivalries, and I just hope that they look at the bigger picture of payback and see this as their thing in their regional bloc rather than a Kenyan thing. I'm hoping so.
Right. And just to mention that what you're seeing on your screens are actually the last session before the Assembly of the Heads of State and Government go for a closed session before the voting begins. Just to take you through how the program looked like. From morning, we had statements from the outgoing chair, Musa Faki Mahamat, chairperson. We also did have Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, speak. We also heard from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the League of Arab Nations, as well as the President of the State of Palestine, and of course the opening statements by the Chairperson of the African Union and President of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. Later on, of course, just a short moment ago, we had remarks by newly elected heads of state and government. They were given 3 minutes each, of course, to make those remarks. The Republic of Liberia, the President of the Republic of Senegal, the President of the Republic of Botswana. We also had the Prime Minister of the Republic of Mauritius, the President of the Republic of Ghana, as well as the President of the Republic of Mozambique and President of the Republic of Chad. So what is going to happen now is that there's going to be a closed session at exactly 1 p.m. I believe, and that will go up until 2 if I'm not wrong, and then after that we will be seeing a continuation of the program. So of course we're going to be following it up by the year and just looking at what is happening there. Our crew is on ground. We have our Duncan Khaemba currently in Addis Ababa at the AU headquarters, and of course what do we have here is that we have Mohamed Sheikh El Ghazouani, the outgoing African Union chairperson and the president of Mauritania, handing over the mantle to his successor, who's now the Angola president, Joao Lourenço. And that is exactly what is happening now. So we are going to be taking a short break here on the broadcast before we come back and take a look at what's happening there in Addis Ababa and, of course, other things that we are still following up here in the country. And I will still be here with my panel till the very end, when perhaps we believe the results will be out by then. I don't know. From experience, how long do you think that entire process will take? I don't know, Professor Nzomo?
You mean the voting process?
Yes, till we get the results.
It really depends, because as you know, the minute they do the ballot, they go to the ballot, each member of state, individually has to put the ballot in, and that process, by the way, is supervised by the members of the ministerial body, the executive council. They are the ones who oversee that. They are the only other ones in the room. They are like the returning officers. And the reason why I'm saying all this, that process is not predictable completely, because when they go for the first round, they may not get a clear winner. And they have to do another round, and maybe a third round, and maybe even a fourth round. And so that process, would determine then how long they take, because they have to have a clear winner, and that candidate must have, I believe, because they are that is 32 votes.
32, 33?
I think 32 or 33, because right now they're voting. The members of state and government, as far as I know, who are in Addis Ababa, are 49. So if you can calculate that, it comes roughly. Yeah. So until we get a clear winner, they may have to do a few rounds.
All right.
And that will determine then the amount of time they take.
All right. Let's take that short break now. We'll continue with our coverage in just a moment. Stay with us. All right, thank you for staying with us as we continue with our rolling coverage of the AUC race. That's for the chairmanship position. We have the deputy chair as well as the commissioners. In studio, of course, still with me are Professor Ambassador David Kikaya, Professor Ambassador Maria Nzomo, and Dr. Edgar Githua, as we try and make sense of what to expect, the outcome of the elections, and of course, what will be happening thereafter. But I must say that these elections come as Africa faces, like you talked about, Professor Nzomo, many conflicts in the region. There's a lot of devastating conflicts in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have the situation in Sudan. And in Sudan, for example, you already have an estimated 12 million people displaced so far. That's a huge humanitarian crisis. And the AU has consistently been criticized for being ineffective in addressing some of these issues, some of these conflicts that we're witnessing in the different countries across the continent. Do you think, and I'll begin with you, Dr. Githua, do you think that's a fair assessment that the AU has been ineffective, that it has just, what do they term it, a toothless dog?
Thanks. Yeah. So it's a very important question, and at the risk of bashing the continent, it is a mixed bag. I'll put it this way. The AU has been effective to the extent that its own clauses of non-interference of internal issues of member states, that kind of binds and ties its hands from intervening through early warning mechanisms when there are possible conflicts that are about to break out. The AU balances between pleasing the summit, the heads of states, and their individual interests, and doing the right thing for the continent. That's my personal assessment of the issue. So its ineffectiveness comes in the fact that it cannot whip certain leaders who are getting out of line. And why does it? Why is it? It almost appears in my assessment like it is afraid. Like if you look at the Sahel region, let me give an example of the Sahel region. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, who threatened and literally, threatened to pull out of the body and all that. These kinds of threats, in my view, I feel like the AU is scared of this blackmail, that if we are too hard on our individual member states, they could threaten to walk away, thus weakening and crippling the body. And then the AU faces the dilemma and the problem that most international organizations face, the lack of enforcement, that member states are there willingly. And with the AU does not have its own enforcing police force or mechanism to make its member states do exactly what it's supposed to do. So that toothless bulldog tag will continue to plague not only the AU, but even the UN itself has been called that at some point. But more so for the AU, because you find that where the AU needs to crack the whip, it does not. Wwhy? These main decision makers are the summit, this exclusive, let me call it a big boys club, and my seniors will correct me if I'm overstepping, this exclusivist big boys club who protect each other and are not willing to make the tough decisions. So countries are not willing to call you out so that next time you do not call them out. So this negative reciprocity, so that ends up making the AU become, toothless and ineffectual, because it does not want to make tough decisions on individual member states, and especially the ones that appear that are influential in their various regional blocs. So yeah, the AU is, that is one of the biggest challenges it has had, and it will, I don't know when it will shed off that tag. Then the other thing is the issue of funding, which we are going to bring up. The AU's budget is give or take $500 to $600, $700 million. The bulk of that funding comes from our donor partners. So how are we going to be independent as a continent, as an organization, the African Union, if African countries do not take up this financial burden? So the AU, we cannot claim is totally independent, because these vested interests who help to fund, talking about the European Union, countries like China, you know, they will, if they have their own interests, they will pull the strings behind the, behind the scenes. So that in effect makes the AU ineffectual. It panders to African interests, and to an extent you cannot fail to accuse it to listen to some other ghost voices, you know. Yeah. Professor
Nzomo, just to piggyback on that point, the ineffectiveness of the AU, and Dr. Githua raises a very pertinent question. It's the issue of let's call it the Trump's cuts, right? So US President Donald Trump has cut US development aid to African countries, and this has hit the continent quite hard. This will also impact the mandate of the AU in that sense. But where do you see the timidness, that timid tag that AU carries, where does it come from?
That's a good question, but a very difficult one to really say it is one thing where you pin it this on. But I want to go back to that point about national interest, because it's a very, in my mind, I've always understood that we actually are the ones who actually end up. What do you say about the food?
The low-hanging. In what sense?
Okay, I'll put it differently. We want to achieve our national interest. We also want to achieve our regional interest. Yeah? There is an extent to which, if those two have to be achieved, we have to give something at the level of national interest.
Okay.
And in particular, my concern with this, near obsession with this thing about national sovereignty. And I don't think it's so much the clause of non-interference that is our problem. It is mainly the fact that even what is, the legal framework that we have put for ourselves, we are unable to implement it. I think there is a space for shared sovereignty. I'm heading to what you really want me to talk about, and this is about the external dependency, why we are not able to, remove that, tag on ourselves. Including just, making some effort as a regional group when we are negotiating externally, and we have a lot to negotiate with. We do not negotiate ourselves, and literally, the effect is negative on us instead of positive. We have resources on this continent, but somehow we are not able to put it together to do some horse trading, say with China, who is one of a partner with Africa. China comes here and dictates on us. We almost imagine that because they have given us some assistance to build some roads, some railway, the infrastructure project, which is a big thing, that now our responsibility ends there. I think it should come a time where we say, China, if you're going to give us this money, we accept it, but on these terms. They want our oil and gas, among other things. We do not make that joint effort, that collective space which is needed for Africa to work together. And China easily can divide the continent And that's what it does. First of all, we all be invited to China as Africa by one country called China. And they negotiate with us as a group called Africa. And by the time we get out of there, we have nothing but a declaration or a resolution and nothing else. But when we go home, the Chinese come individually to negotiate with each one of us separately. And that's where I'm getting at. We do not have a cohesive space where this regional integration that we've been talking about since independence, this Pan-Africanism spirit, we see it live in the way we act. Because dealing with powerful countries requires our collective action. It cannot be done on an individual basis. And that collective action should not be dictated by China, for example, where they invite us as a group and they have already set an agenda. That is not a space for collective action. We would have to go ourselves and say, we want to meet with you, China, to discuss this matter. And it is not just about giving us assistance. It is about trade, and it is about giving us technology or sharing with us those extra capacity you have for technological application, helping us to build our industries, not just a railway or a road, and in a sense, helping us to reduce our dependence on you. That part, we cannot blame China. We are the ones who are lacking in a strategy, as far as I'm concerned. And that's why I'm saying we literally are almost politically suicidal in how we negotiate with the rest of the world. And it is because this regional integration agenda has never really been fully consumed. And that's where I'm seeing, for me, the biggest problem for this continent. And getting a new chair for the AUC should help us in that regard. But like the colleague has said here, the AUC is not going to have to be able to be effective unless it has full support of member states, not as countries, but as a collective. We are sharing a common vision that they are given enough space, to negotiate on behalf of Africa. Is that what is called multilateralism as opposed to bilateralism? That is multilateralism. Because right now the way we are moving is we retreat to nationalism, but we are still singing about the multilateralism or regionalism in our case. Yeah, and so therefore, what I'm seeing here is a situation, even if we are going to elect one of these people, we are going to go back to square one. China built the AU for us, the building. They are still here, continue to service us. Our debt, which we haven't discussed here, is rising all over the continent. One big issue. It is a very big issue. When are we ever going to overcome that and make a real difference? And I can tell you, even as these elections are going on, China is in Addis. And it is taking a keen interest on this matter. Right. And it will be a major player also in terms of the outcome. So Africa is not lacking resources. Africa has a lot of very smart people, but we are not, by smart I mean we write very good documents. You look at the Constitutive Act of the African Union, it's very well done. It has all the right things in it. We have other institutional frameworks within the framework of the AU. So the problem is lack of political will. Lack of political will. And that is what is going to determine how we move forward, whether it's dealing with DRC or dealing with any of the other problems and challenges that we are having. We need collective political will of the members of the AU Assembly, who are heads of states and government. I've always said, especially looking at the UN, and it applies also to the AU, the UN performance is as good as its members. There is nothing the Secretary General can do on his own. The same thing applies to the chair of the Commission. However good he is, however transformer he is, he would need to have support of the collective goodwill of member states.
Right. So, Professor Kikaya, your insights on that, and certainly then the person who manages to clinch the seat of the AUC has his work sort of, to some extent, cut out for him. The issue of integration, the issue of bringing Africa, you know, to a balancing, bargaining power with the global powers is a big concern for the African people.
Let me first of all begin by just slightly differing with my colleague Nzomo on the issue of lack of political will. I want to recall one statesman that people like to hate and love in Indonesia, Sir Winston Churchill. I liked him quite a lot, but many people didn't. But anyway, he said something that the far back you look, the far forward you can predict. And what did he say? He meant by that, whatever mistakes and faults or successes you've had in the past, you can sieve and see what do you go take forward with you or not. When the likes of Kwame Nkrumah came onto the political scene of Africa, their ideal was a United States of Africa. And for reasons well known to all you academicians, that could not be a reality. And in fact, Nkrumah said he had a prayer that give us, O Lord, political power, and all else shall be added unto thee. We were given political power, but all else was taken and continues to be taken from Africa. What am I saying? I'm saying that this English expression, he who pays the piper calls the tune, still plays havoc on Africa. And my colleague Gidwa has amplified that when it comes to where are we getting aid from. The second saying I also want to use very close to that one is the expression that Africa still suffers from the quandary of divide and rule. And this is being intensified, in fact, more so now than before. If you look at how many forums have been brought together to try and deal with the Africans pretentiously as individuals, but collectively under one foreign power is going on. She's referred to China. You have the Francophone Summit. You have even the Turkish Africa Summit. You have the Japan also has come up with its own. India has come up with its own. And I can go on and I can go on. But look, even the so-called developed countries have realized that perhaps this may not work. So they come up with something which they pretend to have Africa ownership, in something called the BRICS. So they bring in not only African countries, they borrow from Brazil, they bring in India, bring in China, and still want to coerce around what you may call the Eastern Bloc rather than the Western Bloc. Where is this taking us? It is taking us down the path of divide and rule. Africa has the political will. If you go to Karen at the Defense College, was a center called IPSTIC. And what IPSTIC does, which I had the pleasure of being one of the founder members of the lecturers there, what it does, and I'm glad it has now grown into a fully fledged university. What it does is it brings together trainees from all over Africa and also abroad to train as a unit so that they can form a critical mass, that's the word, that can be called upon at any time to form a peacekeeping or peace enforcement entity. So the question is, why are we not having that? The political will is there, but the means with which we can achieve that has and continues to be taken from us. We have the resources, yes, but I think to me, Our resources are our dilemma. You know that expression of my horn is my dilemma. It is the concept of the bloody diamonds that has to keep us conflictual so that they can continue to access their resources. And this is, let me tell you, I don't want to start discussing the DRC because I did a whole PhD on that area, the East-West conflict on strategic resources in Africa. And I said some 40 years ago now that I will not see, Kikaya, will not see peace in the DRC in my lifetime. And I do not see any signal of peace in that particular country. My only advice will be to the Kenya government to try and steer away, if they're going to be regarded as a neutral country, which also would have played us in very good place as far as this candidature is concerned, to stop getting involved, especially in regional bloc conflicts militarily. It is prestigious. The Kenyan team is leading peace, bringing peace in Goma. But if you do...
but Prof, that wasn't a military operation when Kenya was part of the ICRAF, that's the East African Community Regional Force. It was, they actually managed to sort of, and you can, I know you have done immense research on that. From my understanding is that the East African Regional Force managed to push back, you know, the M23 rebels from accessing and taking over part of the eastern part of the DRC. None militarily, but by actually through conversations and dialogue.
That's exactly what I'm saying Kenya should be. Kenya should be in the position of not being seen as part of the problem. Why do you think our embassy in Kinshasa was invaded? It has never happened anywhere in the world, let alone in Africa. Because they've seen Kenya as combative. How are you going to explain to that guy in the streets what we are saying here academically? Yeah, and this is what I'm saying. There is a thin dividing line where you are seen as being part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And you know, in our early days in diplomacy, Kenya was being accused of not having a foreign policy. And I said, if we give them, for they not know the dynamics of international relations, because as soon as country one starts relating with country B, they can only do it through a foreign policy. But what Kenya did that time, and we were labeled many other words like we sit on the fence. But I must say, yet a proper analysis has not been done to our sitting on the fence and the benefit we reaped. The economic development that Kenya achieved at that particular point in time by being regarded as sitting on the fence is not comparable with what our neighboring countries, I will not name any names, so you can Google it for yourself, achieved at that particular time. We were able to devote our energies and resources and attract those kind of resources in a country that was seen as the oasis of peace in Africa, because we did not get militarily involved in conflicts. And I still insist that this is the path that Kenya should take if we are going to continue to be a leader in international relations. The Secretary General in Addis Ababa, in his speech, said that he would love to see Africa get at least 2 seats on the Security Council.
Correct.
What are we doing towards getting that? And you know, to get that, you have to get maximum votes, especially from Africa. And there's no small or a big country, or insignificant or unpopular country in Africa that you don't want their vote, because each country will carry a single vote. So the more neutral role we play, obviously and publicly, overtly, the better Kenya's foreign policy will result in elevating the image, the prestige of the country hereafter.
But let me ask you just very quickly, currently as we stand, from your assessment, what is Kenya's image in the region and the continent itself in terms of its foreign policy?
Yes, I was restrained when I said that I'm glad we are carrying on this interview when those guys are tied up, but they can go to the tube and one could. I must confess, Kenya's image, especially in the region, is not as a neutral player as we were regarded earlier. I think we are being seen as being partisan, even in the conflicts that arise. We had the same problem in southern Sudan, remember, but we were able to sail over it somehow because we changed our strategy in southern Sudan to try and work with all parties. So that's why Garang, Riek Machar, my former alumni, were brought on the table together, separately, then eventually together. If you go back, in the days of the likes of, I know he had not been thought about that time, of Kenyatta, our role in Angola, for instance, we played a very nonpartisan role in there, and we were able to bring some semblance of peace in Angola. The trouble with our thinking that we can get militarily involved in the DRC and achieve anything is we're forgetting that DRC is not really an Africa problem, as people say. DRC is a very unique cosmos of external, intrinsic problems. When you have a war in Russia and Ukraine, it only leaves the DRC as the only source of strategic resources. That's a subject for another time. So everybody would want to see that they have their stronghold in the DRC right now. Most of the world is depleted in terms of what we call really strategic mineral resources.
Right.
The only trough that still remains a little bit in southern Sudan, near the border with Kenya, and then the DRC. South Africa is exhausted. West Africa, you'll get precious minerals like diamonds, as I've said. But when it comes to industrial, strategic minerals and resources, you are talking of the DRC.
The DRC. Yeah. All right. Dr. Githua, I mean, the DRC situation is immensely critical, especially now, and even as the chairperson of the AUC would then take over, I think that would be a key priority for the chairperson to look into. But like Prof said, there's a lot of intrinsic external pressure that comes at play when we're looking at the issue of DRC. It's not just an African issue, you say. So then, what happens? What's on the table for the chairperson?
Yeah, so the chairperson, number one, has to come with that mindset. And this is where, luckily, regardless of who of the three candidates gets chosen, they will get a very competent technical team to support them. But of course, the diplomats have an added edge because of just being in that space for a long time. The DRC problem, like what Ambassador Kikaya is talking about, is, number one, from my analysis of it, is number one, getting the parties to the table. And getting the parties to the table, Tshisekedi doesn't want to recognize that M23 rebels are actually Congolese Tutsi. He claims these are Rwandese, these are Rwanda, you know, and he wants them out. The incoming chairperson of the AU needs to be a consummate negotiator, a diplomat par excellence. He needs to be able to get rallying through regional support, because now he's not going to come and start another peace process. It's good to take the Luanda and the Nairobi process. Sit down, Tshisekedi, Kagame, down first, to have them, everybody air out what their views are. Remember, already Tshisekedi and Kagame, and I don't know whether Tshisekedi got to, I don't know whether he made it to...
No, he's not in Addis Ababa.
So how will he cast his vote?
That will be interesting.
He's not going to cast his vote.
Yeah, so that's the other question. So getting Tshisekedi and President Kagame to sit down on one table, I think that will be a big win for the AUC chairperson if they're able to negotiate and bring about that to happen. Because unless these two leaders are willing to sit down and talk and put their cards on the table, and remember, as we are talking about all this and trying to suggest possible solutions, there are these external interests that people are afraid to mention, or these ghosts that want to remain hidden. their interests within that conflict. So it is a very tricky conflict. It's a complex conflict. I will differ with my senior Ambassador Kikaya. I think there is hope. It is just in the strategy of how it is done. You know, African solutions to African problems. And I don't want to sound very naive and idealistic in thinking that it will be done overnight. But for me, I see if Tshisekedi can agree to sit down and talk to the M23, or sit down with Kagame and they have a candid conversation. Tell Kagame, look, what are your interests? Kagame will tell him FDLR. If you can take care of the FDLR for me, I will supporting M23. Trust me, we will begin to de-escalate that situation. Then we can now talk about how does the DRC now secure its minerals from these external actors. That for me is I know it sounds very idealistic and very simplistic, it's very complicated, but if Tshisekedi can realize M23 have valid grievances about the eastern parts of Congo, if he's willing to sit down and listen to their grievances, we start de-escalating. If he has a conversation with them, then he has another conversation with Kagame. Kagame will tell him, take care of FDLR, and you'll never see my troops in Rwanda. Then at least there is light at the end of the tunnel. It's not as simple as I'm making it sound, but it's a possibility.
All right. Let me hear from Professor Nzomo on that particular matter and what you think would be. And are you optimistic that perhaps we might find some headway in the situation in the eastern part of DRC?
I don't think I'm taking any side here.
Kenya.
You know, I have to look back at history myself. The history of that region, which we generally call the Great Lakes region. To be very frank, the problem we are talking about is not new. It is a persistent problem which has almost become chronic. And I think there are not going to be any simple answers to this problem, because it has many players in it. Those immediate gainers in a region, and you can see they have already taken a very strong position. Some of them have not even gone to Addis Ababa because they are still, you know, their minds are at war.
Right.
This process started in the 1960s. It is not a new problem. And that's why I was saying, and I think I am you know, going to now use the word I wanted to use before, and I couldn't get the word, shooting ourselves on the foot as a continent. We know there is no way we are going to move forward when we have serious problems like the DRC. But all of us are not willing to do the heavy lifting. We just want to do the minimum. That doesn't cost us at the level of our national interest, which we hold tightly to, much, you know, in terms of the action that needs to be taken. This action, Zainab, is not going to come from external actors. It has to come from within the continent. We must have the resolve. And this is not also just an issue of Kagame and Tshisekedi and the East Africans. It is a continental problem, and it should be treated as such. And all the members of the AU should, you know, make it an agenda and sit in Addis Ababa and say, what are we all going to do about this to solve this problem once and for all? And not just DRC, all the other trouble spots around the continent. Persistence of conflict is well known. You don't even need to be a scholar to be able to see the history. There is still that elephant in the room we don't want to address. And I want to disagree with the professor. He had disagreed with me, and I'm going to
reciprocity.
I still believe very strongly we are lacking political will in this continent. There is not, maybe you can say there is some political will somewhere, isolated, but it's not adequate in both form and content. We need to see that this is an agenda, not just about addressing the issue of DRC itself, but even now the problems we are facing, economic problem, serious economic problem on this continent. with a generation where we have 70% of the youth, many of them without employment. We have issues around climate change, which we are unable to deal with. If we do not, as a continent, commit ourselves, not just commit verbally, but with action, and do the heavy lifting of saying we have to make sacrifice. There has to be some room first for shared sovereignty in this continent, where we are willing to forego some of our own interests for the collective good, not for ourselves, but also for the future generation. And that's why I used the word at the beginning that we need a transformer. But that transformer is what we are looking around and asking, who are the transformers in this country? Who are those willing to make the necessary sacrifice to get rid of this problem? If we are waiting for Western powers, for our friends, from the eastern part of the world and other colleagues who are in the BRICS to join us and help us, they will only join us to the extent that they are benefiting in getting something. And that is hardly enough for what needs to be done on this continent. And I really want to say, I'm praying for Raila to get the job of the, African Commission chair. But even him, he cannot do this alone. He will not manage. He is only a chief administrator of a body of heads of states and government who are the decision makers.
Exactly.
He only implements what they say. And so really, we can't treat this DRC problem as this event now that we are addressing what is going on now, the killings and so on. It has been there, Prof, since the 1960s. It's not a new problem.
Right.
So is the problems in West Africa, in Central Africa, and no other trouble spots around the continent.
But you say the biggest issue is the lack of political will
among
the heads of state and government in Africa.
Exactly.
Too much selfishness. And may I say, because they are in Addis, they are not here, a high level of greed. Selfishness and greed.
So yes, Prof.
Yes, I was just going to, first of all, let me make my colleagues at ease that I'm not going to oppose their poking holes in my imagination, because it will take the whole day here for me exactly to fill into those holes. But there's a dimension here that I think we overlook, and I talked about it. This issue of divide and rule, this issue of diversionary tactics by the West. As we get drunk on their beer and chat, these guys are sitting, strategizing on how to overcome our unity. And that's why they came up with the Summit Africa, Turkey Summit, what have you, amongst other strategies. But in DRC, let's stay with the DRC, and I'm not going to bore you with it. We are forgetting that our focus has been taken now to Goma. We forget this Kisangani, another very fertile area. We have completely forgotten about the Shaba province, right in the southeast, which made my good friend Doug Hammarskjöld, academic friend Doug Hammarskjöld, get shot down. And I've been to the place where he was shot down in Dola. So, and I talked to the local people. So our minds now are focused in Goma. When the Chinese are doing havoc in Kisangani, they are failing traditional trees and literally shipping them to China. They are scooping the soils, pretending they are making roads for them, and raw as it is, shipping them to China. Magufuli, we shall never be told the full story. Went and found when they had put some of that soil from Shinyanga and other area on the ships, and he said, "You are taking these soils back." He did not survive. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the intricacies in that country need to have a very progressive and a determined way which goes beyond political will and beyond Africa. If I was to pretend to give a solution to the Goma area, Africa, we were just divided by lines, as Nyerere would say. In Kenya here, we almost had a president, a brother for president in Kenya and another brother of president in Congo, in the Awori family. The issue of the Banyamlenges, the issue of the Ntalhamwe, in Eastern DRC, in the Goma area. It's an issue, if I was to provide a solution, is for the Tshisekedis not to see them as foreigners, but to know that they straddle the boundary into Rwanda, even into Tanzania, by the way. Yeah. To accept them as nationals, as the Bukusu and the Gisu would accept each other in Western Kenya. People from Busia and those across the road from Busia accept each other. This is one of the areas you cannot, like you are doing a blood transfusion of all the Banyamlenges or the M23 for that matter, and they say that you want to ship them out. Some of them don't know any other place other than that Goma. It's a question of how does the international world make the leaders, both in Kigali, in Kampala, to a certain extent in other cities in Africa, and Kinshasa, to see how they can accept. Integration is not the issue because that's home for them. How can they make them feel part and parcel of the republic called DRC? Then when you have settled that, let us now work together to see how we deal with the external forces. And that's why I still feel, or maybe the best thing is for me to die soon so that peace can come to South Africa. But otherwise, I don't see it in my lifetime.
That's a very controversial statement, bro.
I like to sacrifice because I know what that country means. That country can electrify the whole of Africa without going anywhere. That country can give you this water, the whole of Africa, that is going to be the next frontier for war in future. That country can give you all the fossil, precious, name it, resources that you require. But who are benefiting? Anybody else, but not Africa. And that's why my heart bleeds for that country. For the country.
But you shall live till the day that we see there is a liberation of
Inshallah,
the people of Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo.
Next Friday, go to mosquito now.
Yeah, nitaomba.
Tafadhali.
Right, I'll invite you to the mosque as well.
Shukran.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And Dr. Gidhua, just to also look at another aspect of one of the biggest issues facing African countries is the proliferation of military coups as well. I think we've had about 17 military coups within the last 5 years. About 60% has been successful. So this is particularly going to be a key priority for the AUC chairperson to also look at, and you know, the political instabilities facing those countries as well.
Yeah, you're right. Peace and security is going to be one of the biggest, going to be a hot potato for the incoming AUC chair, largely because of already there was supposed to have been, how many, 55 countries voting, 54 countries, 55 countries voting.
Now we have 6
Yes, the
excluded.
The six excluded is because of the peace and security architecture of their countries. It's because of the peace and security issues that they are facing. So already the incoming chair needs to understand, how do I bring back these countries into the fold by, number one, helping to deal with their issues. I remember the Sudan conflict. Kenya was rejected as the mediator because it was perceived that Kenya had ties to one of the parties, Dagalo. Yeah, exactly. So, and you see this perception of that Kenya was not neutral in that country is the same thing that is plaguing us in the DRC conflict once again. But coming back to the incoming chair, the peace and security architecture of the continent is one of those things that he's going to have to face, and he's going to try and rally support in trying to understand. Now, the problem comes in, and I agree with what Ambassador Nzomo was talking about, balancing regional and national interests. Here you are as the AUC chair, and you can see from your bird's eye view and the research and the support and the technical team and the reports that have reached your good offices and good desk, you know where the problem is. Trying to reach out, for example, to make Tshisekedi, assuming let's bash on him because he's a bit far. How do you bring him to the table, getting him to come to the table? This is a sovereign head of state. You cannot have a solution to the DRC issue without his, he's the legitimate sovereign elected president of the country. You cannot have a solution without bringing him to the table. And other heads of state, and their parochial interests and their individual interests and their selfish interests, like Ambassador Zomo called them, that is going to now take a lot of horse trading, a lot of back and forth. That will be one of those big things. Understanding that unless we silence the guns in Africa, the development agenda will not go forward. I mean, a quick lesson on what is the impact of conflict, the refugee crisis. If there's a problem in DRC, Rwanda suffers, Uganda suffers, Kenya suffers, Tanzania suffers. Proliferation of refugees and small arms and light weapons into this region. So security has got to be one of those things that the incoming chair of the commission takes seriously. Because if you can deal with the security pillar in the African continent, then the development pillar, the social economic pillar, those other ones can be addressed. If we have 12 million Sudan refugees around the Horn of Africa, we will not get peace. If we cannot have peace in Somalia, the Horn of Africa is not going to, is not going to settle. DRC affects the Great Lakes. Mozambique and the rebels in Mozambique, the Sahel region, that is one problem. Then there's another one, Zainab, you bring up. I want to just inject the increasing role of private military contractors on the African continent. We're talking about the Wagner Group, now renamed the Africa Corps. The Romanian mercenaries that Tshisekedi had gotten. I know I was so surprised and shocked when I saw them when they were caught by the M23, and luckily they were not killed and they were given safe passage into Rwanda.
Right.
So I was shocked and I was asking myself, Tshisekedi, you've brought Romanian mercenaries. Next, you're going to bring the Russian mercenaries here. I mean, the Wagner Group. I mean, if you've gone to Romania, just look, there are so many mercenaries in that belt. So the role that private military contractors are playing in the African continent, we're talking about Chad, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Central African Republic. The Russian PMCs have literally taken up providing security for extraction of minerals.
Is it exactly what we're talking about, external forces that are playing?
Yeah. So these external forces are not going to allow peace to come into the African continent because they have seen a loophole that will allow them to siphon minerals. Peace for minerals, let's call it that, diabolical peace for minerals exchange. So the incoming chair has his plate full. On any of the economic pillars, agriculture, food security, energy security, but largely peace, he has a big bone to chew.
Right.
And we wish whoever it is the best. He needs to contract Ambassador Nzomo here and Ambassador Kikaya to just give them advice on how to do some of these things, because sometimes I ask myself, who advises these leaders? I wonder where they get their advice from.
And Prof, I mean, there was this conversation that the chairperson should be more inclined to being a political figure as opposed to being a diplomat, so that he'd be able to deal with those very...
It has to be both.
Yeah, it has to be both.
It has to be both, not one. Because it's a highly political problem, and it's about power and power politics. So certainly he has to be a good player politically, but he also has to be a good diplomat, one who is able, to tell people to go to hell and they think you are telling them to go to heaven, and do it in a very nice way. But he has also to be very clear-headed to know the interest he is representing. And I keep using this word, horse trading, to appear like he's giving something in order to get something. But I'll come again to the same point I made earlier about that the chair cannot be seen as a messiah alone. This guy standing alone in the middle of AU, expected to have all the answers, and those people who really are the obstacle are not, particularly helpful. And I would also want to go back to the issue of the governance structure of the AU. You see, although he is the overall administrator of all the matters of the AU, there are 8 other organs apart from his. Those organs have their own individual mandates. Peace and security, which is what we are discussing, it is under another pillar. The Peace and Security Council. If you look at the provisions of that pillar, if that pillar did its work as it is supposed to do, the problems you are talking about here would be resolved.
If it was led to do
if
what
it was, yeah, exactly. But I'm
huge distinction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But I'm also saying it would, in fact, one of the biggest issues we have now inside the AU itself is that these organs are not working very well together. There is no coordination, there is no cooperation, some of the functions are overlapping, and in part, although it is not said so in so many words, they are not particularly interested in the commissioner, the AU commissioner, who is in charge of administration, poking his nose in an area where they have the mandate. So that is a problem which we have also to deal with. And it can only be dealt with by heads of states and governments, because they are the ones who are charged with the responsibility of making a determination, making a decision that you people shall work like this.
Right.
And then on this issue, you must cooperate. There is no question this is my mandate and this is the other one's mandate. So I would even say the first thing about this calling, because we are calling for now for the reforms of the AU.
Yeah. I think it's a continuous process.
Yeah, but I'm saying one of the things that needs to be addressed in that reform is the structure, that structure.
Correct.
Because right now it lacks an overall coordinator and a mechanism that links the activities of the various organs, whose overall purpose was to be able to address all the concerns of the AU and bring them finally to one table. They have not been able to do so. So I would say that's the starting point within the AU itself before we even go anywhere else, so that the peace and security architecture and the boss there, they work very, very closely with the head of the secretariat, who is now the chair of the AU Commission, and of course with a lot of support from member states. One of the issues we have not discussed, fully here, is the issue of budget, the resources to do the work. And it is like the elephant in the room again. Member states do not want to address the fact that you cannot rely on external donations to strengthen your own organization. The work of peace and security requires resources, real money, that must be invested here.
What is the current mechanism of funding the AU?
The mechanism is
member subscriptions.
And these are members, some of who do not even pay their dues.
Exactly.
That's why when I talk about political will, I'm talking about things like that. Even paying that membership fees is a big problem for some members. And it's not because they can't afford it. It simply is not a priority for them. And so they don't even contribute. We are notorious for that, And then we create a peace and security council, which is on paper looks excellent.
Right.
But we are not willing to do the work of mobilizing resources. Internally, we put a budget that is saying 70% of the resources will come from outside. And we expect results, good results. Humanly speaking, there is no, nothing the commissioner, the AU commissioner can do unless, he is getting, the necessary support to allow him to do his job. That is my view on this. And I'm only mentioning that in particular pillar. That goes for all the other organs that we have, which could also come into play in terms of, strengthening the capacity to get the results. And I agree. If we don't do well on matter of peace and security, everything else collapses. Issues of development, they collapse. Issues of human rights collapse. So really, it is not an issue even of debate, about whether we should or should not. The question is, why aren't we doing it?
All right. And Prof, then would there be a system within which would, quote unquote, force African nations and member states of the AU to contribute or channel, a certain amount of money to the AU to make sure that things run smoothly?
In fact, if you listen to the speech by the outgoing Chair Musa, he almost like mourned about that he was happy that he was leaving, and now that he can speak openly about a subject that he would not have talked about when he was there. And that is lack of the goodwill, whether I want to call it political or not, the goodwill to contribute. Zainab, I don't think there's any coercive power you can use, but the heads of states in Africa ought to be mature enough to have a sense of ownership of this organization, albeit only with the subsidiary support, especially from administrative point of view or of external. Let the external come in the area of project funding, specific project. Like when a former prime minister was in charge of infrastructure, we want to connect Cape to Cairo. You know, let them come in at that particular area.
Yeah, and I want you to hold on to that thought, Prof, because I'm going to come back to that. Just very quickly, I want us to get a picture and sense of what is happening in Addis Ababa right now. We have our Duncan Khaemba right outside the AU chambers. I believe that's where the voting process is ongoing. Khaemba, if you can hear me, a very good afternoon to you from Nairobi. Just give us an idea of what's happening right now. We believe the closed session has begun. Talk to us through that.
Good afternoon, Zainab. Here now in Addis, we've entered that phase that everybody will now be sitting on the edge of their seats. But it's not just about to happen right now. What is happening is that after now the open session ended and we were asked to vacate the Nelson Mandela plenary, the new presidents, 7 of them newly elected presidents, will have 3 minutes each to address their peers who will welcome them into the African Union officially as they take charge of their respective countries of having been recently elected to lead their countries. Once they finish, then we will have the candidates, 7 of them. 3 for the chairperson's seat, then 4 for the deputy chairperson. 4 because the men automatically in the deputy chairperson's race have to step aside because of the rule that says if a man is the chair, the deputy has to be a woman and vice versa. And because the chair has only 3 candidates as males, automatically now the females will be the ones that will be allowed to contest the deputy chair position, and therefore that is what will be happening. So after the newly elected heads of state give their 3 minutes speech to address their peers as they welcome them into the union, the candidates will have 6 minutes each. When you calculate that duration is almost an hour that will be taking place. The same heads of state are supposed to take a break for lunch. We don't know at what point they will be taking the lunch that is in honor that has been that is in honor of the outgoing, or rather lunch that has been hosted or will be hosted by the outgoing AUC chair Musa Faki, and therefore we will be expecting, the earliest we expect the voting to begin will be at 4 p.m. So that is what is happening right now, Zainab, as we now go into the wait and see session, because the heads of state or the voters are into the closed session. This is very, very interesting, as we said, depending on how the vote will be taking shape. Remember, after the suspension of 6 members from 55 African states, 6 states, that is being Burkina Faso, Gabon, Guinea, Mali, Niger and Sudan, having been suspended because of the coups that happened in their respective countries, and therefore lack of a democratically elected government in place, they stand suspended, and therefore the 6 will not be participating. Now that leaves us with 49. If the Southern African bloc makes good its threat to vote for the Madagascar candidate to a man, then it means automatically from 49, the 2/3 required will be 33. If you minus 16, which are the countries in the Southern Africa bloc, then it means we will have 33. for it to end in round one, then either of the candidates, be it Mahamud Yusuf of Djibouti or Raila Odinga of Kenya, a miracle maybe needs to happen that either of them gets the remaining 33 votes and the other one does not get anything. That is if we hope to have the election called in the first round. However, if the South African bloc automatically will deny the other ones getting the required 2/3 threshold, because definitely they'll have to get votes from their respective, the people that they have campaigned to, and therefore they will go to the second round. Now that is where the third candidate or the candidate who will have gotten the least number of votes will step aside to pave way for the remaining two. Now those two will have to sweat into that particular round to ensure that they win 2/3, which is 33 votes. That is what we are expecting. Kenya had hinted a week ago that they had marshaled or gotten assurance of 28, and therefore they have been shopping for 5 extra votes to get that threshold of 33. We are not so sure whether the 28 will count, because remember in 2017 we were almost in that particular situation. Kenya had campaigned properly in 38 countries, but when it came to the vote, Amina Mohamed lost by 3 votes in the 6th round to Musa Faki, and Faki had to go to the 7th round alone and was elected by 38 votes because Amina Mohamed did not go into the final round. And therefore, that particular time they were going up, they were voting until, what the Catholics say, until the white smoke comes out. So you had to vote and vote and vote. After that, now when they made changes to the election rules, and they said there can only be 2 rounds, first round and second round. If none gets 2/3 in the first round, 2/3 in the second round, and then the election is suspended for a year. Those are the new rules of the game, and therefore that will be expecting. Zainab, when you look at the intrigues that happened thereabout in 2017, until the last minute, Kenya was winning that race. But what did cost Kenya was the dalliance with the Sahrawi, which made Morocco, that had acquit the African Union, to seek readmission or to rejoin. And they really pushed and said they are part of Africa, they want to come back and rejoin Africa. And that is when the King of Morocco came here in Addis Ababa in person that particular night. And then the royal lobbying took place. And of course, he said that he wanted other countries to push for Morocco to be reinstated into the African Union. And in return, he would be returning the favor. And he got the favor by being the countries in Western Africa and Central Africa supported his bid, Morocco's bid to be reinstated into the African Union, and that is how he now paid back by also lobbying for the candidate from the Central Africa, and that is how Kenya lost. So this time round, we are not so sure what will be the dynamics that will be determining the outcome of this vote. Back to you, Zainab, in studio.
Thank you, our very own Duncan Khaemba there in Addis Ababa, of course, giving us a glimpse of what is happening right now. There is a closed session. We do believe that the voting process will begin about 4 p.m. So there is an address by the new heads of state who have 3 minutes each to address their peers there in that closed session, then about 4 p.m. But we will be keeping you up to date with regard to exactly what is happening there inside the closed session. Hopefully we'll be getting more details on what's happening there. But Duncan Khaemba is on standby. Interesting, he says, you know, different dynamics would play into what is going to take shape today in the voting patterns. I think we spoke widely about that when we began this conversation. But Prof, I hope we did not derail your trail of thoughts as you're speaking.
Saliva yet.
Oh, that's great. So I will allow you to continue with your insights.
Yeah. Maybe just a point I want to pick up from what Khaemba talks about Morocco and Morocco's return to the fold. They left rather on a nasty note, especially when the Organization of African Unity and the African Union has all been behind liberation. in Africa, but they still wanted to hang on to Sahrawi. And most African countries didn't take kindly to that. So we find that quite a number of African countries actually gave the leader of Sahrawi full diplomatic and presidential status. But behind the curtains, it was alleged that Morocco always felt that they were not African enough to be in Africa. Instead, it was alleged that they were actually applying to the European Union in the expanded European Union for them to be part of the European Union. Of course, they were rebuffed for very good reasons. So their coming back was really a face saving. And remember, they had tried to come back even earlier, but the African Union said no. Their conscience has not been cleaned enough. So there are all these intricacies that come into play completely, assumably in the background, but eventually you find that they are actually playing a very prominent role. And this is something that we really need to watch very carefully as we go into these elections. One thing, even if we are not banking so much on the SADC member countries, we should also inject in these other dynamics, like religion, like the Francophonie. You know, you have countries like Seychelles down there. Would they want to be the SADC or would they want to be the Francophonie? So it will be very interesting. In fact, today I am determined not to go to bed until I see the last one voted. Not because I will not be allowed through Kondele, but just because I can tell them that actually I was there and I saw it. Right. And we fought a good battle, we won, or we fought a good battle and we lost.
But clearly they are very different. I mean, many dynamics that are going to play out. I mean, you have the Francophone-Anglophone divide, you have the issue of the groupings in terms of regional groupings, and then also the issue of religion as well. So many things to look into.
Exactly.
Correct. But I want us to look at something also here before, you know, we end the conversation a little bit later. But the legacy of the outgoing chairperson, Musa Faki. And let me begin with Professor Nzomo. Musa Faki has served his two-term, 4 years. So that's 8 years. He's been the chairperson of the AUC. How would you describe his leadership at the helm of the commission?
I think he has done his best, given all the surrounding factors that I have even mentioned earlier. But I think he did better during his second term, and I think it's because he had also learned, you know, from the experience of the first term. I would say that if he had more support, he could have done more, because the things we are talking about, all these conflicts in the region, issues of human rights, development, etc., they were happening under his watch. But there was only so much he could do with the resources he had. I think he was a fairly good diplomat. And I think he engaged quite well with different constituencies. I didn't see him too much, though in the Anglophone direction. He was really a Francophone person, but within the Secretariat, I think he navigated that fairly well, but not well enough because, like I say, there are all these other obstacles, some of which he could not deal with, especially within the framework of the structure of the AU itself, the governance structure. A lot of the problem and lack of action on the other pillars was because of this. He simply didn't have the power and the authority to get them to work with him and together. You know, and that could have been anybody else, not just Faki. But since you have asked me about his performance, and that's why I'm saying he did his best, but that best was not good enough, which is why, you know, we are pleading for maybe the new chair can come with some miracle. But I can tell you for free, unless we change the way we do business as a continent, and especially at the heads of states and government, they must lead from the front. And, you know, issues of resources are going to matter. You can't expect any a chair to be able to do anything without resources. He needs to be supported politically also, because the member states, they may not say so publicly, but behind the scenes, they are also undermining his work. And so therefore, I can say, everything considered, he did the best he could. So that's my own personal assessment.
Right. Dr. Gidua, Musa Faki, and I don't know if it's you share the same opinion, but some termed him as an underdog, while competing for that position. So he did shock many when he got the position. So interesting to see how he's been able to navigate all the challenges surrounding the continent in that position as well.
Yeah. No, thank you. I'll answer that question by also injecting something else, piggybacking on what Professor Nzomo has talked about. The tag of underdog is positive when you're going for this election, because the heads of state, in their view, they believe they will manipulate you once you get there. I want you to see the tag of being underdog is good for you when you're going for the election, because it gives a perception to the heads of state who are voting that we will manipulate, we will control that candidate, he will not be very strong. The disadvantage, it's a double-edged sword. The advantage and disadvantage that Prime Minister Raila Odinga has going into this election is that he is viewed by these statesmen as a peer. He is the president that never was. So he speaks the language. He relatively, in seniority, African culture, they can respect him for his age and his experience and the stature he carries. But that can also work against him when they think that they will not be able to push him around. They will not be able to manipulate him into advancing whatever agenda they would want. So Musa Faki came as the underdog, and what worked against him in his first term and why he's been called a weak chair from what I've been reading around is simply because he was not able to reach and talk to this summit, and they saw him as an equal. So for him, he was, for lack of a better word, and not wanting to disparage him in any way, they saw him as this person who could not tell them what to do. You don't belong. Yeah, you're a junior. They considered him as a junior. So the advantage that Prime Minister Raila Odinga might have in this election, if he gets the seat, is that he will be able to almost sit at their level. He's not a head of state, but he will command the aura, and the respect he will command from them will not be a pushover. Now, like I said, that's a double-edged sword. It could work for him or against him. If some feel that he will not be a pushover, they might want to choose the weak candidate who, quote unquote, they can push around. There are those dynamics also.
All right.
So Musa Faki, what made him ineffective was because they never respected him and never gave him that listening ear. And coming back to what Ambassador Nzomo and Professor Kia were talking about, that political will, because it is Musa, you see, let me put this differently, Zainab. Because it is Musa Faki asking me, not the AUC chair, because it is Musa Faki asking me, will I capitulate, will I agree or not? Because it is Prime Minister Raila Odinga asking me, and this is, let's think about Obasanjo, let's talk about Ramaphosa and other heads of state. I know Raila, I've known him, I've seen him, we've been in the trenches. There are those dynamics that will come in.
Was it because of his experience and background and age perhaps, or the country he came from, that would have perhaps not given him that level of respect that would have been accorded to him?
I have a theory. I have a theory, and I want my seniors to correct me now in this theorization. If you win this...
Taking notes.
Yeah,
Please
taking
do.
notes. Yes,
Yes.
beautiful. Yeah. Grade me, grade me, Mwalimu, yeah. If you win this election resoundingly in the first round, you get the respect of those heads of state, and you appear in that club large and in charge. If you have to get to the 7th round to get this vote, we helped you. You won by the skin of your teeth. You're not as strong. You get the dynamics. If you win it resoundingly in the first round, you command the respect of the entire continent from the word go. But if horse trading has got to be done, envelopes under the table, I'm just making a joke out of it, envelopes under the table, horse trading, I don't know who, we will give you this, you come in there as the weakest person, you look like you didn't deserve, you look like mountains had to be moved for you to get the seat. you do not get their respect, they will not listen to you.
All right.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's my theory. I want
Let's
my
hear
seniors
from
to...
Senior Professor Kikaya. Let's grade this
grade that
theory.
That theory and that hypothesizing. Yeah.
No, that theory is very plausible. Again, it goes back to fundamentals of international relations in terms of perception, in terms of prestige, in terms of image. So that, of course, qualifies. But I'll give my marks at the end of the session if you can keep watching.
Yeah.
Faki has played a very stabilizing, non-controversial role. And I don't think you can take that away from him. His demeanor in handling that office has added value to the gravitas, non-violent gravitas of that office. And I think this is a challenge that he's left behind, that the person who's coming behind him is going to have to follow. Even the mere fact that he was able to contest a fairly fierce contest and win his final term in itself says something. It says something about resilience, determination, and resolve to see what he set out to do to his rightful conclusion. But let us not forget, as much as he's almost like the chief executive of the African Union, by and large, he only implements policies passed by the interministerial, cascaded to the summit, heads of state summit. He cannot do anything outside those resolutions. Worse so, those resolutions are passed by the various sectoral commissions who have intrinsic understanding of what they want to be cascaded to the heads of state. So his success should also be judged, or failure for that matter, by how effective have these other commissions been. One, in terms of doing serious work that resonates with the ground on the continent, and how well they have been articulated, even in terms of being able to attract the resources that we keep on talking about. But for me, I would say, under the circumstances that Africa has been going through, both in terms of regional conflicts, in terms of even climate change, dynamics, he has tried his best, and I think he'll be going away with his head and shoulders up.
Right. I want to throw in this question to the panel, and I think this is a question that has also come out several times in the conversation in terms of age. So, Professor Nzomo, the question of Raila Odinga's age and the stand that Africa needs a more youthful leader for that position, do you think that's a fair assessment?
No. maybe because I'm going in the same direction, generation-wise, although he is my senior by quite some distance. I'm saying no because age only matters if you are unhealthy, meaning your faculty, the mental stability is not good, or your physical health is in a bad place. But if all is that together, and you have the passion, the commitment, you have the vision, and really you are prepared to do the hard work of leadership, the age should not matter. It should not matter. Obviously, there will reach a time by pure biological clock, you'll not be able to do it. And if that person, I would say, it's like, let's take the case of Mandela. When he came out of prison. He's one leader who I admire a lot for what he was able to do in that 5 years. But I admire him most that he was able to listen to his body and to know when to quit and just become a statesman, which is what he did. Because even when he started his first term, he was already an old man very old man because he had aged in prison. But he did a terrific job during that five years that could have not been done by anybody else. He brought a certain amount of reconciliation, racial reconciliation in Southern Africa. And in fact, at the expense sometimes of alienating his own people who felt he was betraying them because they had, been campaigning for him to get out so as to get rid of all these white people. And here he was calling for reconciliation. But apart from that, even the global support he received just spoke to his statesmanship.
Right.
And he was an old man, because you are on the age issue. But the difference between age and knowing when to quit is what we should be looking at. When you know that, even if people are not saying so in so many words, even you can feel you are not making much contribution here. So I wouldn't, for example, dismiss Trump purely because of his age. He's also an old man. I would dismiss him on his performance. I am not going to put his age first. I will put his performance. And if I say some negative things about Trump, which I have done before, it's not because I've never mentioned his age. It has never been an issue to me. And so, yeah, it may matter if you are pushing yourself to be in that position, and you know very well, mentally, your mental faculties, your capacity in terms of energy and strength to do it, you don't have it anymore. There are other factors, I think, that are more important as determinant of good leadership than age, in my view.
Right. And because we're winding up on the conversation, I'd just like to get, the panel's final thoughts, but also looking at the implications of Raila Odinga's candidature for the AUC chairmanship positions here locally. Whichever way it goes, if he wins, if he does not win, will there be any political ramifications for the country? I mean, Raila Odinga has served as the longest-serving opposition leader. He served in many capacities in government and outside government. But I'll begin with you, Dr. Edgar Githua. Talk to us about what you feel is happening, even because the country is quite excited to have Raila Odinga take up that position. But do you see a change or a shift in the dynamics of the political structure in the country?
Yeah, thanks for your question. Truth be told, there's going to be a shift. That one, unless there's anyone new to Jerusalem, the truth is that there's going to be a shift. Whether he gets it or not, there's going to be a shift. If he gets the seat, the shift is going to be what happens to his political base. Will he still have enough influence on his political base to give them future direction? And two, how well will his political base transition and accept a new leadership to take over that base? That is the way I look at it. If he does not get it and he comes back, will he agree to gracefully now remain this elder statesman and groom new leadership? That's one role. Will he want to continue being actively involved in local politics? And what direction does he take, and what does he feel, what role does he want to fill in this, now the sunset years of his life, so to speak? So there's definitely going to be, let no naive person out there think that there's not going to be a ramification. There is going to be a grave, grave ramification, whether he gets a seat or not. If he gets it, I am saying the direction he will give his political support base. Where do they go? How do they reorganize themselves? How does he help them transition into new leadership? If he does not get the seat and he comes back, will they allow him to retire from politics? Will they allow him to mentor new young leadership? Or will he want to still play a very active role in politics? That's a question. But there is going to be a shift, that's for sure, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Professor Nzomo, final thoughts?
On the matter of
local politics, having Raila Odinga contest for that position, and any implications thereafter in the political landscape in the country.
First of all, I would say that as Kenyans, we have to be prepared for the fact that and the temperatures now are very high, palpable. Everybody is expecting, a miracle, literally, to happen in Addis. But on these matters, political, especially this kind of high-level political action, which is not at the national level, it's at a regional level, we should be prepared for this to go either way. And we should be able to manage our temperatures, not to use it as another occasion to do things that are counterproductive for the country. And we should accept that when you go into an election and a competitive process such as this, there will always be winners and losers for whatever reason. And we should be well prepared for that. And just thank God our candidate was able to get to that point, and that we know we did our very best, but perhaps our best was not good enough. So that would be my starting point as we wait to hear the result from Addis Ababa. In terms of what you asked about the political shift, this is a country of shifts. We are never, it only lasts one electoral period. Even before that 5-year end, there are already shifts taking place. Right. So the only thing one can add is whichever way things go in Addis Ababa, there will be some shift, definitely. There will. Politically, there will. With or without his winning. Yeah? But of course, the ramification will be more if he doesn't win. And some shift will be because some people feel angry and had already put their things together and they didn't want to move from there. But also, the entire, political environment, you have to adjust to the outcome, whatever the outcome is. Right. And perhaps we should, maybe because we are closing, I should say, if he is elected, Kenyans, he will not be your local leader anymore. The job description, which he has, does not allow him to get involved in national matters. He's supposed to be above board. He's supposed to be really having that regional outlook. Don't go with your CV looking for a job because you are Kenyan. There are regulations within the AU. The Commission has its own statute that even details clearly, and how people are hired for any job. There are all manner of requirements apart from meritocracy, including issues of regional balance, gender balance, and of course, people will be using, can I say, a huge, not, what can I say, this yardstick to see how many Kenyans are being given jobs. So he has to be very, very careful. He has really to be a regional statesman, and I think the way we can help him is by not making too many demands on him. We should
by the way, Kenya had, I think, the highest delegation in Addis Ababa. I saw them singing and
I know.
Yesterday during dinner.
Yeah, and I said that it is nice to go and give him solidarity, but you'll not even be allowed to step into the hall. You can only do that from outside. Right. And you don't have a vote. There's only one vote, and it goes to the head of state. All right. Yeah.
Let's hear finally from Professor Kikaya.
I think there can be no denying that either way the dice falls, there'll be some ramifications in that circle we call Raila, because on the Kenyan as much as in the continental scene, he's an icon of sorts, a person who you have to reckon with. But let me come just to Kenya. The footprints that he has trodden on the country are such that one cannot very easily rub them. We've seen what I like to call Raila orphans already saying we shall be getting directions from Addis Ababa, even if he's there. So definitely there are certain people who will definitely be affected, who have always climbed onto political scene by hanging on his court, and I think you can name them. Secondly, his platform, that is ODM. ODM has been Raila, and Raila has been ODM. And his departure is going to see swords drawn by the kind of, if we like to call the next generation of leaders. And we've seen already warning signs about that. The extent to which they will get to each other's throats is going to be the final nail in the coffin of an organization called ODM. So as far as I'm concerned, I want to wish him every good luck. At least his being there will give President Ruto a reprieve. he does not expect to see him on the streets. Finally, on that issue, if you have been watching Raila's political career, towards these last elections, his structure was starting to wane. And even in his own home area, you found opposition cropping up, even in his own Bondo. You know, he's not represented by someone from there.
Right.
And so I think definitely there are going to be ramifications. But on a much pleasant and personal note, let me say I want to mourn the Aga Khan. He was my first employer.
Wow.
I'm so disappointed that I didn't take his offer to join his office in Paris. But I know that when I was foreign news editor for Nation, I did an article when he came to visit, completely oblivious of the ramifications. When he read it, he was so impressed. He asked if I could go to join his office, but my editor-in-chief, Joe Rodriguez, could not release me. And,
right.
I just wanted to mourn with the Nation Group or Nation Media Group.
Right.
On his demise.
Thank you.
At a personal level.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Professor Ambassador David Kikaya, Professor Ambassador Marian Zomo, Dr. Edgar Githoa, it's been a fantastic pleasure to have you on the panel since noon, just to look at the intricacies and the dynamics of this election. But just very quickly before we wind up, do we see any sort of diplomatic fallout in the outcome of the results? Do we see anything like that happening?
I think, quickly, I think that's why it's a secret ballot, to manage this regional and these kinds of relationships.
So we would not be able to know.
You will never know who
voted.
Yeah, they will never open the server.
You can speculate, but we could never.
You can speculate. Yeah.
But you are not allowed to speculate. It's very correct. Everything has to be politically
and that's
correct.
how the process is designed to be. But thank you so much, lady, gentlemen. We appreciate your time. And this rolling coverage of the AUC elections will continue. Michelle Ngelo Odhiambo has yet another panel that will be going through the next 3 hours looking at the voting process. So hopefully we will be able to know the election results by perhaps 5 to 6 p.m. But that is something that we'll be watching out for. Thank you for watching. My name is Zainab Ismail from the entire fantastic crew here. Let's take a short break. When we come back, Michelle Ngelo Odhiambo will be taking over the next phase of the conversation. Good afternoon.